Okay, my name is John Clark, and I'm here with Dr. Mariah Starr, and a professor and a historian, and Cecilia, who is a Democratic organizer in Arizona. So we could start with introductions. Mariah.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Mariah Starr. I have a superb education, graduating from Harvard College uh, 25 years ago, and then getting my PhD in political science in 2011. And from 2004 until the present day, I have taught college classes in American history, world history, international relations, American government, pretty much the social sciences in New York City, Boston, Beijing, China, Shenzhen, China, and Tucson, Arizona, my hometown. So I'm the expert historian here and political analyst to help put a historical framework around everything that's happening in the present moment. So I'll stop there.
So my name is John Clark, and um, I started out my career as a electronic engineer doing design and development in the Silicon Valley communications industry. And from there, I moved into psychology and was studying for 3 years for a PhD in clinical psychology. Um, Took a break and then went back in 2018 to study toward my PhD in cognitive neuroscience. So my specialization is consciousness or first person representation, and so I'm very much interested in how people translate what's happening in our society today with how do they reconcile that with their internal experience of themselves. And Cecilia.
My name is Cecilia Vindiola, and I have been active in the Democratic Party and in democratic processes, marching, etc., carrying signs, boycotting since 1975, basically the last 50 years. I retired from Pima County government. I have my career has been as a public servant um, since since 1975. In between, in 1975, I had a bachelor's degree, and in 20 the year 2000. I'm sorry, not the year 2000. 20 1989, 90 or so, I got my master's degree through Bernard Baruch College out of New York City colleges. Um, Master's degree there. And then upon returning, I went right back into being a public servant. And I retired as a public servant from the Department of Wastewater in Pima County. In the meantime, throughout all of those years working those careers, I have served in various political supportive capacities, including voter registration and working elections and recruiting volunteers and working at headquarters and marching and carrying banners and doing all the things that you can do that are peaceful and nonviolent.
Thank you, Cecilia. Is there any chance um, to get closer to your microphone to amplify your voice?
Let's see, where is the microphone? Is it part of the camera?
It might be.
All right, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, a bit, yes.
Yes, I can as well.
Okay.
Good. And we can see your face better as well, which is great. Thank you. Okay, so let me outline why we're doing these videos. between July 1st, 2024 and January 20th of this year, 2025, the federal government lost its legitimacy to exist. On July 1st, 2024, the United States Supreme Court turned the American presidency into a king because the president is now immune from criminal prosecution for all official acts. After that, after Donald Trump won the election by winning the Electoral College, the Electoral College met and voted for him, and they should not have, because the Electoral College is designed by the framers to prevent someone like Trump from becoming president, not just once, but twice. Third, our Constitution has a 14th Amendment, and Section C of that 14th Amendment says very clearly anyone who starts an insurrection against the federal government or gives aid and comfort to those insurrectionists is ineligible to ever again hold federal office unless Congress makes an exception to this clause. So our Congress did not make an exception. It allowed Donald Trump to be sworn in as president, and thus it rendered itself illegitimate because any Congress that ignores the written laws and its own governing document, which is our Constitution, becomes illegitimate. So we have illegitimacy in the courts, illegitimacy in the executive branch, and illegitimacy in the Congress. And when a government becomes illegitimate, it loses the right to govern. It must be destroyed by the citizens and replaced by something better. So right now, we're in the period of our federal government engaging in lots of rotten things. So we should catch viewers up to date on all the horrible things that have been happening just in the past week.
Well, we've had probably one of the most significant events is the floods in Texas and the slow response of FEMA to that. And we've had escalating immigration raids out in California and other states. We've the immigrant that was unlawfully sent out of the country, Abrego Garcia, has been brought to Tennessee, and they're trying to figure out how to get him out of the country before when he's released from custody. I think this upcoming week. So there are an enormous number of pressures. Oh, and the biggest thing is that Pam Bondi came out and said there's nothing to see in the Epstein files, which turns out to not have been fully appreciated by many Democrats. And that was something that was really foundational to the MAGA world, and there's a huge split going on about that. So you have Kash Patel and Dan Bongino threatening to quit at the FBI. You have people demanding that Pam Bondi resign. That's not going to happen. And Trump just recently said there's nothing to see here. It was all a big Democratic hoax, started by Biden, Obama, and I think even Clinton. So there's a lot of turmoil. It's increasing. There seems to be quite a bit of worry about how things are going to go in the midterms. Some people expect that Trump will declare martial law and halt him. I don't think he really has enough power to do that.
Well, let's stay away from what might happen in the future and just talk about what has happened in the past, because I don't want to speculate just yet.
So that's probably that's probably the basics. right there. Somebody died during an ice raid in California.
And then before that, Congress passed a horrible budget that took money away from one of our welfare goods, Medicare and Medicaid, and put it into ICE, making it the third largest military in the world, and thus with even greater capacity to do evil in the US by
More,
harming innocent people.
more harm, more and more and more harm.
So we're living at this present moment in a country that is descending very rapidly down the rabbit hole of political violence and evil acts against innocent citizens.
Now, the good news is there are a number of organizations that have popped up, some of them national, um, that are connecting communities together and people together within communities to protest if they choose, contribute other ways if they can. And so, um, people, I wouldn't say that there's mass mobilization, but there's discussion of a general strike. I don't know what day that's planned for. Um, and so there are a number of efforts to actually push back. And that gentleman, Abrego Garcia, he wouldn't be back in this country if there wasn't such a public outcry. So it does make a difference. And and if you're not out there protesting, then writing letters, getting involved with your community in other ways are ways that any of us can contribute towards resolving this parent nightmare that we've got sucked into.
Yes, so that brings us to the central issue that we are trying to grapple with, which is when the federal government acts in a way that is provocative, destructive, and thus provokes moral outrage in responsible citizens, how do we as citizens respond effectively and sustain both our anger and engage in activity that responds strategically to ending these provocations and replacing the government with something better? So that's part of why we have brought you on, Cecilia, to understand your perspective of how to engage locally and sustain your activity over decades, because you've done that.
Well,
So what's the formula?
I think it's staying connected with world news, local news, particularly printed news, always learning and knowing what your local community is doing, what they're not doing, staying in touch with your representatives and communicating with them, emails, phone calls, both to your local representatives and to your federal representatives. All of that has to be part of what we practice as responsible citizens, staying engaged with our local government, our federal government, staying engaged with the activities that those governments are carrying out and providing our feedback. I mean, for example, locally in my own community, there are going to be 2 new overpasses built that run right through our community. Going to the meetings, talking to our local government representatives, staying engaged with what's going on around us, what our representatives are doing. Every now and then, listen to the minutes or to the actual live meetings of our city, of our county, etc. Attend local town halls. All of those things. Do what a responsible citizen would do to stay connected with their community and to make sure that the community is prospering, that our representatives are doing the things that keep our communities clean, healthy, that we don't have food insecurity, we don't have potholes all over our transportation systems, and so on. Just basic local things like that.
Okay, and I completely agree with you that local activity is essential. One of the most important adages of politics is that all politics is local. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Again, I want to point out, though, that there are two kinds of activism. One kind is the active protest that is practiced by a social justice warrior. So, like Roland in our last video is a great example of a social justice warrior who asked the moral question, how could you not be out there every day protesting? And that's a good question because that question puts into direct conflict our responsibilities to family, to business as a business owner or employee, and also just to our local communities. Because it basically creates a hierarchy of activity, saying that at the top of that hierarchy is protest and direct confrontation with the government, where you might be getting arrested for some activity. And everything else falls below that. So being a good parent falls below that. Being a responsible employee of a company falls below that. Attending your son's or daughter's sporting event falls below that. So
Well,
everything gets consumed into this vortex of protest and direct action.
and I might add that every other issue that doesn't rise to the level of protest also falls below that, or is tacked on to whatever issue that does rise to level of protest.
Yes. And so that hierarchy creates a position of moral judgment for people who do not engage in protest every single day and do not take direct action against the government, who are maybe writing letters to the editor instead, or writing policy. So, a good way to think of this historically is the civil rights movement. So, on the one hand, there's direct action. There's African Americans going in the streets of Montgomery, Alabama, protesting and getting attacked by German shepherds, by the police, having their heads beaten in by citizens. Like, it's violence on the streets that's being televised to send a moral message to our citizens. But on the other hand, you have Thurgood Marshall leading the NAACP in a legal case to dismantle Jim Crow, which resulted in Brown versus Board of Education, a unanimous decision in 1954 that ended segregation in the South and paved the way for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So being a lawyer and being a legislator are just as, if not more effective than being a protester and confronting the government with direct action because they shape the new society. So it's from that perspective that what John and I are trying to do is communicate that, okay, yes, the government is evil by engaging in these moral abuses of power. But we need to expand the range of political activity so that it's more than just protest and direct action.
Well, I think
Protest.
also, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that I also think that grassroots organization, when you're dealing with corrupt institutions like this current administration, those actually become um, unraveling agents, so to speak. They don't add to the strength of the democracy because the democracy has failed. What they do is at least in my belief is that they highlight the problems of the national governments and some state governments, and in some cases cause them to degrade further because they're not compatible.
Yeah, so we need institutional strength at the grassroots level when the institutions at the national level are failing us. And that's why it's important to get involved in your local organizations to take part in that civic activity. But I also want to bring our attention historically to the responses of past failures. So back in 1775, when King George and the British Parliament were abusing their power by raising taxes on the American colonists, one response was direct action by the Boston Tea Party, going on the boat, throwing the tea overboard as a protest. But when the Revolutionary War happened and the Second Continental Congress declared independence from the British government, and that declaration was written by Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was not out there protesting; he was writing. And when the Revolutionary War was happening, it was General George Washington who had Alexander Hamilton as his aide de camp, helping to plan battles. Hamilton was not out there engaged in protests against the British government. He was helping to win the war to defeat the British government. And then when the war ended in 1783, it was Hamilton who helped organize the convention in Philadelphia to write the new Constitution. And then after the Constitution was written by James Madison, it was Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay who wrote the 85 essays we now call the Federalist Papers that helped us form this new government called the United States of America under the current Constitution. So we know from the founders that there are all kinds of activities like writing a new document that help change the political environment. So with that in mind, with that context, I have written a new constitution to replace the current government.
I have a question about that.
Okay, go ahead.
My question is, why did you eliminate the Senate?
Okay, so before I talk about all the features of the new constitution, I want to make sure we're all in agreement that the current constitution no longer works.
My position on the Constitution, I don't know that I would go that far as to say it no longer works, but I would definitely say that the Constitution needs a lot of work. It needs new amendments. It needs some amendments replaced. The concept of a brand new Constitution had not occurred to me at all until you brought it up. But I had given a lot of thought to updating the Constitution that we do currently have. So thinking about a brand new Constitution is something that I have just started to give a great deal of thought to.
Well, I think one of the things that stands out to me about the Constitution is that I don't think the founders ever envisioned such a polarization of our population, like with extraordinarily heavily populated coasts and relatively lightly populated interior. So now when you look at the Senate, it's wildly unfair because you have two senators for 500,000 people in Montana and two senators for 46 million people in California, and they have the same pull in Congress. So, I mean, that's where I think the Senate had its purpose back in the day, but I don't really think it serves a useful purpose now.
So let me just correct you on that historically, because the framers did, in fact, consider the polarization of the country between rural and urban because they had exactly that. Virginia being a classic case because Virginia was the most populous state, and there were other outlying regions of the country that were more rural. And so the reason why the Senate exists in the first place is to give the states equal representation under the principle that the enlightened citizen is the rural farmer who has the time and the privilege, the capacity to be educated on the classics, to be educated on history, and thus to have a voice in the Congress that is more enlightened than the rabble, the mass poor, uneducated citizens who are represented in the House. So our entire government, our federal government, is based on constraining the voice of the people because the people are to be feared. The people are stupid and violent. So if you're going to change anything, you have to start by changing that basic principle. Are people still to be feared? But most important is that the problems associated with the current Constitution are related to the inability to anticipate the rise of the national security state, which includes the Central Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon, which manages about 1,000 bases around the world, the National Security Agency, which consumes information on all citizens in the country, the National Security Council, which has the vice president in charge and leading the Joint Chiefs of Staff to manage military skirmishes around the world. And all of that is secret. It is beyond the reach of any American unless the president declassifies documents. And that's usually 50 years after the fact. So our national security apparatus is invisible to us. And that's a problem right there.
So we don't have a lot of journalists who are actually watching any of those procedures that can report back to us.
Not unless they have anonymous sources.
Or clearance.
Huh?
Or clearance.
Yes. They either have to have security clearance or some sort of anonymous connections to people in the Pentagon or the White House.
Right.
Okay, so what this does then is give a president as commander-in-chief capacity to abuse military power around the world and to never be held accountable by Congress or the courts. So is that problem that enables someone like Trump to abuse the military by using it against protesters in Los Angeles and using it to bomb Iran, all in the same week.
So that means that if there were no Senate, then a bigger House.
Okay, so let me get to that in a moment. So, do all of you agree that the current Constitution has defects in it?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. So, defects then require amendments.
Correct.
And we have 27 amendments so far. So 6 months ago, I wrote an article in the Arizona Star pointing out the illegitimacy of the federal government and calling for a convention to amend the Constitution to fix some of those defects. Since then, I've concluded that in the current political environment, even like 10 years from now, when the environment is different, there will be no convention because we're too polarized. But what we need is a new document that the convention would produce. And whenever I talk to people about a new document, they always get afraid by what could go wrong in the new document. So I've created a new document to eliminate that fear and give us a new starting point. And what I've done in the new document is address the defects of all three branches of government. So, with the first branch, the Congress, on Article 1, I've taken away the Senate and I've enlarged the House. I've taken all the duties of the Senate and then I've redistributed them to the House and the courts. So the House now has more members to conform to the ratio of one member for every 30,000 people. Because the framers believed that one member for every 40,000 people was tyranny. One for every 30,000 people is democracy. So that ratio requires a membership of 11,000 members minimum. And the House then can create its own committees to take on the functions of the previous Senate, such as treaties and appointing judges. But most important is that we no longer want the president to have the ability to abuse military power. So the president is no longer commander-in-chief. The Speaker of the House is now commander-in-chief. Because the Speaker is connected to the people and can be removed by the House by simple majority vote. So it's much easier now in this new Constitution to end abuses of power. Under the current system, it's impossible to end abuses of power. Because we've seen under the Trump administration, number one, in the first term, he was impeached twice, and yet neither times was he convicted by the Senate.
Right.
So he's demonstrated conclusively that it's impossible to remove a president, no matter how bad he gets. So that means the president no longer gets the privilege of being commander-in-chief. The president in the new system is also fragmented. Instead of one, there's now three. And we can call it whatever you want, president, council, whatever, but there are three of them. And the election process is completely simplified. Under our current system, we vote 3 times: primary, general, and then the general election voters don't even matter because it's the electoral college that meets and votes for the president. That's the vote that matters.
Right.
So I'm just making it more efficient. For the election, you vote once for the president in the primary for a political party. Whoever gets the highest vote total in that political party, the 2 highest vote totals become president and vice president automatically. And so we have 3 parties: Democrat, Republican, and third party. Automatic presidencies. And we no longer have a general election. The electoral college no longer exists. That vote for the primary is the only vote you get. So it becomes the most important vote you make. But because the presidency is no longer the most powerful in the country, it doesn't matter as much. You're no longer voting for someone to change everything. You're voting just for a person to execute the laws.
Well, you're still going to have parties, right?
The parties are essential for the election process, yes. And
Well,
so,
the reason I'm saying that is just as far as the number of different coalitions that might be under one party or another or a third party's umbrella is a nice organizing strategy.
it might be, yes, but the idea of the parties getting automatic claim to one of the presidencies takes away all of the competition between the ideas. We're no longer going to see ideological debates between the parties because
Well,
they
my
will
big thing is it doesn't leave much room for lobbyists who you're going to give money to.
exactly. The power of lobbyists disappears overnight. And if the House has 11,000 members, that also destroys the power of lobbyists because there are now too many House members to chase after. You can eliminate the staff for each House member and give the House members the time to look at bills because each House member now has 5 years, not two. So it's a good balance between taking away the Senate and giving more power to the House. The presidency, each president now has a 5 year term. Each House member has a 5 year term. So we're adding stability to the government by giving them longer terms.
Why would you take away the staff of a House member?
Because originally, in the early republic, staff didn't exist.
But they're needed now.
Yes, because the population of the House, 435, is too small to represent a country of 330 million. That's why the staff are there, to provide that buffering system. If you expand the House to 11,000, suddenly those staff are redundant.
I don't see how. Why would they become redundant?
Because if the House members, if there are more of them and they have more time, there's no pressure on them anymore to raise money.
And
Now
they can
they
write their own bills, right?
exactly they can write their own bills like the original House members did from 1789 until approximately 1960.
So you're saying they can answer their own phone?
Yes,
They can take their own messages?
Oh, I
yes,
mean, it can be an admin assistant.
yeah, like one or two secretaries is fine. But one of the discoveries I made during my dissertation research 15 years ago is that these staff have all the power and they're all invisible. And
Yeah,
none of them are accountable to the American people.
yeah, I can see that. Uh, I, I
So,
I believe that, but I also think that if if you've got an awful lot of responsibility, if you're sitting in one of those chairs, you still can't do it all by yourself.
yes, and that's not a responsibility if the number is 435. By increasing the number to 11,000, you're dividing and conquering the power of the House so that the House members individually have much more time to interact with their constituents, and one individual House member no longer has that much power. So that enables them to eliminate the staff and to get the time they need to read legislation, write legislation, and serve their constituents over a 5 year term versus a 2 year term.
Research? What about researching information they need for their bills?
Yeah, and that research can already be done by the Congressional Research Service. So
There,
Congress already has the apparatus. What it needs is expanded membership. So what I'm doing, having studied Congress and knowing its limitations, is I'm eliminating all that is invisible and unaccountable. and
What about the
increase
just
what?
what about the Justice Department?
So yes, so the all the executive branch institutions, they that is up to the House to do oversight of these agencies, whether it's the Federal Reserve, the Justice Department, the Environmental Protection Agency, all those agencies can still exist, but they will get more members of the House working on them if there are more members in the House to begin with. So I'm increasing the capacity of Congress to actually write laws and oversee their effects.
All right.
That's why 11,000 is much better than 435. When you have more members there, they can do more.
So let's say that there is a good chance that this new constitution could be put into effect. Let's say that uh, it is agreed to run it as an experiment. How would you get it passed? How would you get such a new constitution accepted and passed
Well,
or implemented?
the current Constitution says that based on the conditions of 1787, if 9 out of the 13 states adopt it, it becomes ratified. So I've taken that ratio of 9 to 13 and translated it into 34 out of 50 states. So we don't really need a convention to create a new constitution. We need a constitution that has been ratified by 34 states. And once those 34 states are ratified, it becomes the new law.
And how do you propose getting 34 states to ratify a new constitution?
So we need to replicate the process of the original constitution.
Okay.
We need writers to join me to write the equivalent of the Federalist Papers to all 50 states, showing the defects of the current Constitution and the benefits of the new Constitution. And a concerted effort. So it took 2 years or a year and a half to get the current Constitution ratified by 9 states. After the Federalist authors wrote those 85 essays in local
So
newspapers.
so dissatisfaction also is an important part of it because nobody would really be talking about a new constitution if our government was moving along pretty well and people were in general happy. But the sense of dissatisfaction is getting more and more intense, and so that when the government starts to crumble like that, that's where there's opportunities for new kinds of thinking. And
Exactly. So dissatisfaction can be targeted at a particular policy, a particular politician, or a particular process. I'm targeting the process because if you're angry at a given policy, you just write a new policy, or you vote for different politicians, write a new policy. That's easy stuff to change, relatively. And you can start locally with a state or a city, or you can go above to the federal level to make it national. The reason why I bring up the illegitimacy of the current federal government is because our problems now cannot be fixed by a policy. They cannot be fixed by changing a politician. They need to be fixed by changing the process of how the institutions work, the deep structural level.
well,
We have
I think that there's a lot of existing structure that can be adapted quite nicely. It's not like you're just sweeping out the gutting the building and sweeping the floors and starting that far over.
exactly, and that's why I've used the current political party system to help process the election of the president. Like the current Constitution has no accounting for political parties. The new Constitution uses them to elect the president and simultaneously take away the debate between the parties, because 3 presidents will exist and 2 out of the 3 will help a bill become law. 2 out of the 3 will execute the laws. And since they are no longer commanders in chief, that's the speaker's role, we no longer have to fear a evil or demented president. So
Yeah, I can buy that.
So the new constitution that I've written requires a collaboration with numerous writers to persuade legislatures in all 50 states. So if it took 2 years for the current constitution to be adopted, I expect it'll take about a decade for the new constitution to be adopted.
Wow.
And a concerted effort by, let's say, 10 writers instead of 3 to write essays to all 50 states over those 10 years to adopt the new constitution. So I'm looking past Trump, I'm looking past the current problems and saying we are right now experiencing the failures of a document. We need a new document, and it'll take 10 years to get this new document adopted.
So, wow. So I may not see it at the end of 10 years, but
Maybe not.
good legacy.
So we today revere James Madison as the writer of the current Constitution and Alexander Hamilton as the organizer of the convention and as one of the persuaders, along with Madison, of the Federalist Papers. I mean, John Jay served as Chief Justice, as a judge on the Supreme Court for a while, but that's about it. So we need a new founding period. And so what I'm trying to do is actually pretty arrogant. I'm trying to be both Madison and Hamilton in the future.
Well, at least you have some past guys to go on. I'm not sure that they had the same advantages that you have today.
Yeah. I mean, they probably didn't have the education that I have. Uh, uh, Although Madison certainly did have his own breadth of knowledge. So what I'm doing with this new constitution is I'm trying to convince everyone that yes, the federal government currently is illegitimate, and I'm discovering by talking to people that that's an easy sell. It's amazing how many people in this country have accepted the illegitimacy of our federal government, the
Well,
entire federal government.
I think when it really came to the head is when the Supreme Court, um, when we got like Kavanaugh on there, and people that really just should have never even been put up for the court, and then you start seeing these judgments. Supreme Court, like in my lifetime, was pretty highly revered, and then all of a sudden it's got no legitimacy, and that's been somewhat shocking because they were like the revered institution, right?
Yeah.
Complain about Congress, complain about president, but Supreme Court, you know, they
Now
did
they're
a
not
good
even
job.
liked.
What's that?
And today they're not even liked.
No, I mean,
They're
people
not
don't consider
respected.
them legitimate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why I've divided the Supreme Court into an appellate branch, an appellate version, and an impeachment version, so that the Supreme Court still provides the rule of law, but through the act of Congress, we can now have we can have 13 judges or 17 judges or whatever to essentially dilute the power of the courts. And remember, divide and conquer is a classic strategy. So I've divided the powers of the presidency, I've divided the powers of the Congress, and I've divided the Supreme Court to help make all 3 more accountable.
So 11,000 new members of the House, Have you figured out a budget for that? How much more is it going to cost to pay all of those representatives, provide them with medical and retirement, etc.? Are they going to still continue to enjoy the current benefits of the House and the Senate?
That's not what a constitution does.
All right. So have you thought that through? Because all of that's going to come up in any process that you have for accepting a new constitution. I know that you've written a new constitution, and then there's the process of getting it accepted by, I don't know who will have to accept it before it becomes part of a process to implement it.
So
So,
that there are two ways to accept it. The state legislature can vote to accept it, or the state legislature can set a convention of the people to let the people accept it by a 51% vote. So that's why I said it'll take a 10-year long process for this to happen.
I see. And so how long is the Constitution? How many pages?
It's the same amount of pages as the current Constitution.
What's
It's
that?
just that it changes the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the courts. Everything else remains the same.
And so how many pages is that?
I mean, well, the current Constitution, I think, what, maybe 5 pages?
Okay.
So
Well, I
it's
was
easy to read.
I was
I've left I've left 90% intact in the current Constitution.
okay. Have you added the Equal Rights Amendment? Have you added that into the Constitution?
That can all be added, yes.
And not just the Equal Rights Amendment, but the amendment to protect the planet.
Yes. So everything new can be debated and added by the people in the state legislatures. That's part of the process.
Hmm.
My Constitution is a starting point to take away the fear and to get people thinking in new ways to replace the current Constitution.
All right. And so how do we get there? What is your plan to get people to start discussing it?
Uh, these videos are part of the process.
Hmm.
By watching one of these videos and accepting the idea that our current government is illegitimate, and by accepting that a new constitution is needed, I'm fine with other people writing their own new constitutions. But we need to have a conversation that a new constitution is needed. And that conversation needs to be part of the political process as a response to the Trump administration.
Well, I think that one argument you could make for a new constitution, besides all the other structural issues, is there's been a major loss of trust in the document now that we've seen it perverted in the way that it has been.
Yes. And so the worse Trump gets, the better it is for replacing the current constitution. Because we're facing the same historical conditions that the Second Continental Congress faced under King George III.
Mhm.
As King George III did his worst, that led to the Bill of Complaints that you find in the Declaration of Independence.
Well, I'm thinking that you need to get this concept of a new constitution in front of powerful Democrats that are currently in Congress, like
Oh, I agree. And in front of Republicans and third party members, Green Party people, independents. So to circle back, what I want to point out is that we are currently in an environment filled with moral provocations by our federal government. And what I'm doing by writing a new constitution is adding to the activities of a peaceful warrior. So I'm not out there protesting every day. I'm not engaging in direct action that gets me arrested.
right.
Instead, I'm writing.
Mhm. Power.
And and by getting other people to write as well in the same vein that I am, I'm helping to build a movement that is in its infancy right now, but will hopefully in 5 years have a number of writers around the country writing letters and essays and communicating directly with their legislators about adopting this new constitution or a better version that I've written.
Okay.
And the reason why we're having this conversation on video now is to convince people that this form of activism is just as legitimate and possibly even more powerful than protest and direct action.
Well, interestingly enough, you do need both. It's almost like an argument of whether the heart and or the brain is more essential to life. And
Exactly.
I really do think that like the peaceful warrior, that's about policy and solutions. However, sometimes you need to really get somebody's attention for the problems and understand that the traditional way of doing things up till that point is no longer going to be acceptable. And so now you have those two types of focus working in hand for change.
Exactly. So what I'm trying to do is construct a Venn diagram that includes a broader range of acceptable, effective political activities for the peaceful warrior than the social justice warrior acknowledges even exists. So to put it more simply, the social justice warrior, like Roland, only acknowledges protest and direct action as effective means of political transformation. I'm trying to broaden that range so that we include writing letters, writing books, having conversations with your neighbors, holding gatherings in your neighborhood where you talk about local activities, all things that a peaceful warrior can do.
Right.
Right.
Mhm. Making good trouble.
Yes,
Making good trouble. I like that.
but not getting your head bashed in as a result.
So should we go ahead and wrap it up for tonight?
Mm.
Yeah,
Before we do, I want to say this, John. I agree with you that I still think that we need both. The political activism, I think, is always a good kickstart for peaceful warriors, because if it weren't for those who are willing to go to jail, those who are willing to get out there and protest in a more forceful way, the peaceful warriors wouldn't get anywhere.
Yeah,
yes, I agree.
well, I definitely agree.
So, so I want to step out of the American context for a moment and show that the world history offers us many examples of peaceful warriors. With the most famous, I think, being Nelson Mandela of South Africa.
Good point. And Mahatma Gandhi.
Yes. So Nelson Mandela, as those who know South African history, was head of the African National Congress in South Africa, and they engaged in um, protests against apartheid, which was organized by the government of, of South Africa from about the 1960s onward. So Mandela was then arrested, placed in prison for about 20 years, from the early 70s to the early 90s. Then F.W. de Klerk freed him from prison. Mandela could have gone the route of the social justice warrior, engaging in violent protests because of his anger against the government and his imprisonment. Instead, he ran peacefully for president and became president of South Africa in 1993. So everyone holds that as a prime example of what a peaceful warrior does. They have every right to be angry, every right to be violent, and yet they are not.
He took out his anger in a very, very productive way.
Yes. And Mahatma Gandhi is also a great example of a peaceful warrior. Someone who sees the plight of India under the British, has every right to be angry and violent, and yet preaches non-violence as a strategic way to engage in civil disobedience. To bring it back to the American context, a good example of a peaceful warrior is Henry David Thoreau, who in 1844, when President Polk launched the war against Mexico and thus raising taxes to support that war, Thoreau refused to pay those taxes, thus landing him in jail. So his buddy in the Enlightenment movement in Massachusetts, Ralph Waldo Emerson, they both graduated from Harvard College. Emerson came to Thoreau in jail and asked Thoreau, "Why are you here in jail?" And Thoreau asked him in return, "Why are you not here?" Again, giving the moral reasoning that Roland Baker gave us last video. So it was Henry David Thoreau who wrote the essay Civil Disobedience. And he's also known for writing the book Walden, about his time at Walden. But we have a long history of peaceful warriors writing essays in this country, writing books even, to show us ways in which to resist government, change the culture, meaning it,
Not get arrested.
and not get arrested. So if you look at like the Civil War was caused by mainly two people. One was Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin and appealed to middle-class white women in the North. And then the other person was Frederick Douglass, who escaped from slavery, got to Boston, and became a very eloquent speaker in Boston, demonstrating that slaves could be free, educated, productive, eloquent members of society.
And eloquent.
Yes.
Very eloquent. He's one of my best heroes.
So if you look at American history, you'll see these peaceful warriors popping up repeatedly to criticize social injustice or evil laws that are destructive.
Well, I want to get back to John and agree with him that it's probably time to start talking about wrapping up.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Well, yeah, I think this has been pretty good. It's like a lot of what you're saying. I think it would resonate well with people just on a personal level. The 11,000 Congress members take a little bit of thinking to realize how something like that might be organized and operate. But the idea is to have the representation. So I appreciate everybody's time tonight.
Thank you, and thank you so much to both of you for letting me explain the new Constitution that I read.
Well, I'm curious to see more of it for sure.
And
Yeah.
more strategic planning on how to implement it.
Yes, and I'll be working on that in the next few weeks and months and years.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, it's good to see you, Cecilia, and I'm glad that there was no technical problems tonight.
Well, so far we were good for this last section, and hopefully the next time that we do a Zoom, I should be good to go now that I've downloaded the actual app itself.
Yeah. Probably be easier for sure.
Good.
All right. Well,
thank you to both of you,
yep.
and have a good evening. And for anyone who's watching this, thank you for your attention to these issues. We're living in very important times.
Indeed.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.